Okay, so I'm Joakim, working currently at Axis as a security engineer. I've been around for some different companies, and this is a little bit of my experience from different areas. The military graded part is mainly from my recent experience at Advenica. It's a pure security company in Malmö, doing a lot of um, uh, stuff for the defense industry and industry where security is essential. And you can say security and robustness, so that's why I brought up that in the same in the same presentation. So the equipment we will discuss here today is kind of ranked top secret, and that means if I say something you believe are not for anybody's ears, forget it. Yeah. I think maybe Martin from Advenica, are you still here? You are? Yeah. So that it's me and you that will be put in prison after this discussion if I do something wrong. Yeah. In fact, we have been colleagues for a couple of months, or how long time? Yeah. I have no clue what Martin is doing. And I assume the same goes in the other direction. That's how this industry works. It's a lot of closed doors, and we don't discuss much at lunchtime what we do. So yeah. But anyway, there are things that is really interesting. It's about cryptography. It's about communication. It's sort of rugged devices that should last for a long time, being secure, robust, and even military graded. And my sort of belief from all of the security corners I have been into so far is that if you have good encryption, then you have the freedom in communication. And that's the sort of statement that Advenica has too. Okay, so we can go to the next slide about segmentation. So we have been through so many areas here, I think. Some of you have already touched upon what you can do in software, for instance, that you can run virtualization and stuff like that to isolate software applications, processes from each other. Of course, that's fundamental. When it comes to networking, we used to talk about segmentation. So that's a way of distinguish these two areas, I think. Some of you may question, can't we trust the kernel or a kernel? It doesn't necessarily have to be Linux. Well, and then I think I need to slide away from from the presentation a bit and maybe ask you, um, are you aware of the spyware Pegasus? You may have heard about it. Are you infected by it? Yeah. Who knows? Yeah, it's a really good question. And it's really hard to answer because things quite soon get so complex. We know that that Linux kernel and many other operating systems, they have been around for long time. Especially the Linux kernel, it has been around since somewhere in the 90s. It has been tested for years in millions of devices and stuff like that. But we know that it's not only the kernel controlling things in mobile handsets, for instance. And the problem with Pegasus is that it's enough with a simple text message that don't appear on the device, that do not even give us a audible advice that something is going on or anything like that. And so that's kind of back to the days when I was starting using computers at all. I one day experienced I had a virus. It was called Cascade 17. I don't know if any of you have had the similar stuff. Cascade 17 was infecting all executables by 17 bytes. And by these 17 bytes is what it was capable of spreading itself to all bootable media. So as soon as you inserted a floppy disk, this is quite a long time ago, then the floppy disk was infected, and so the next computer. This Pegasus spyware seems to be developed, I don't know how to say it, hand in hand or in parallel to what the developers at Google, Apple, and Samsung and whatever try to avoid this kind of spyware. So it's not easy to know. And we know that this Pegasus is quite capable of doing interesting or scary things with our phones, controlling the camera and stuff like that. Okay, so if you don't want such things to happen or intercept with your communication, then you need to have sort of a lot of controlling mechanism and stuff to be added to make sure what's going on and not going on. Yeah, okay. Let me see. So I think we can go to the security and assurance levels. So in order to make a device secure convince yourself and others about how good or bad different parts of the software components, hardware components are. You need to be through some way of modeling things or making up a structure of questions and answer that may help you and your customers be convinced that this is a system good enough for what we are aiming to do. And then you may ask yourself what kind of methods are available for such tasks. And there's, for instance, this EAL, assurance evaluation assurance level. It's quite complex and have many levels, 6 or 7, I don't remember exactly. You can read about it on Wikipedia if you would like to know more about it. Advenica used it for a while, but decided it's quite soon make things complex and quite expensive, both in time and in terms of money. So there was a colleague of mine, I think this may be part of his PhD studies, Håkan Arefors, and he was together with the Swedish Armed Forces developing this Arefors assurance steps, which is a sort of way of reverse requirements questionnaire. So they found out that requirements for security equipment often becomes negative. So it's likely that a requirement states that it shouldn't be possible to, and so on. And it's quite complex to prove that such a requirement is fulfilled. So the Arefors way is instead something like finding a sort of root statement that is simple enough to answer for a huge area, and put that as a sort of root argument in the stem of a tree, branch that statement off into branches and leaves with smaller questions that in the end reaches the level of your functions in the code, where you actually should be able to give answers by pointing to the code and show that this and this question can be answered and fulfilled by this piece of code. And then you, of course, have to do this over and over again until everybody is happy with the sort of statements, questions, and answer you have for that typical application. And you can imagine how hard this can be if one of the components in a communication system is the Linux kernel. we are upgrading from kernel X to kernel Y. It's 79,000 lines of code that is new, and so on. And the leave questions in RF assurance steps, they are typically for 5 to 10 lines of code or anything like that. So then instead, it is a matter of agreement that this and this piece of software is something we trust. And now you realize that things getting complex again. Because if you simply decide that this is a piece of software, what is it today? 20 million lines of code that we trust. On the other hand, you can also easily understand that you have to start off by something like that. Otherwise, you won't reach your goals at all. No matter what kind of way you try to reach a sort of high assurance level, it will take you time, it will cost a lot, that's for sure. Okay, we can go to the next slide with communication examples. I don't know if you stripped that off. Was it that one? Yeah. Okay. So just a little to mention what sort of communication equipment this is about. It's network equipment that we used to call VPN crypto devices. So they have a protected network, and there's another outside of the box, if you'd like to say so, which is the open communication for internet, for instance. There's also a third network interface on such a device. It's used mainly for software upgrade. And things are constructed in the way that as soon as you enable the third interface for software upgrade, the other two are disabled. The systems making up the two different external network interfaces, they are totally separate. Separate computer systems. They are running Linux and a minimal stack of other applications. They are connected with a PCI bus, which is also separately controlled by FPGA hardware. So that means in case you succeed to inject malware in one of the external interfaces and be able to execute that on the Linux box, you won't be able to continue spreading the disease, so to say, to the next communication level, because that's a completely different architecture that cannot execute such code. In that level where we have the PCI bus, we also have some controlling mechanisms, and we have the crypto engine. The crypto engine is also FPGA based. Is everybody aware of what FPGA means? Otherwise, yeah. So that's good. Otherwise, you can just Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. um, there's also a separate hardware for monitoring all the things that is going on in this crypto device. And that means everything, I will say, everything from reading, writing to memory, communication over the PCI bus, requesting services from the crypto engine, um, sending data to the, again, a separate device, controlling display, HMI and buttons, stuff like that. That's a tiny one, by the way. I think it's had 4K of software or something like that. A standalone chip for the power management. And the power management is separated for the different systems in this device. So you can have, you can drive it, power it up on one battery on one hand, and a power supply from wall socket or whatever it is from the other direction, so to say. If you have an outage in power supply, the other one will take over. And all the communication that should go through this crypto device are, of course, controlled by a lot of keys, cryptographic keys. And keys are stored on smart cards that you have to unlock to get them into the device. Okay, we can take the next one, the half duplex communication. That's also a sort of interesting device that Advenica is compiling. It's called data diode. There's a few out there on the market, and they are all quite expensive. It's a one-way communication device that make the two, or the parties that is involved in a communication, believe that they are in touch with each other, but the communication is flowing only in one way. And just to get a simple understanding of how complex it can be with this simplified RFOS assurance steps, this device have actually a optical diode. That means it's impossible, in my opinion, to make communication flow in the opposite direction. But it was approximately 1,000 hours of making up the first root statement for the RFOS assurance steps for that device. So then you can imagine how complex it was for the VPN crypto. But a typical application for this data diode is power plants, nuclear power plants and stuff like that, where you definitely want to have measurement data out of several computer systems, controlling systems and stuff like that. But you absolutely want to be sure that you by no means infect or inject malware or any mistakes in the plant. Okay, so we can go to the conclusions, I think. A system-hardened Linux can be really good, depending on what application it is. Me, myself, I have one out there on internet since 2011. It's rocking still. So that's good. It really depends on what you have to do and who to convince about how good it is and safe and secure and all this. Segmentation is fundamental. It's quite important, especially if you try to convince someone that there's only one type of communication going on for this and this wires. So then you need a strong segmentation mechanism. Finding a proper assurance levels, the statements and questions and answers is fundamental if you should gain trust. And of course, then it's really important that you convince yourself and your customer what you are doing throughout the whole development process until you have completed your system and the setup. So that's it. There's a final slide. If you'd like to get to know more, there's a podcast by Jack Resider. He's a really good journalist. I think he's an engineer from the beginning, running a podcast called Darknet Diaries. True stories from the dark side of internet, he usually say. Listening to one of that shows, of his shows, convinced me to continue in the security corner, striving to make the world a bit more secure, hopefully. If you instead like to read, then Bruce Schneier is a really good writer. He's also a founder of some cryptos. He's writing essays and documents and articles about almost anything within the security area and the crypto world. Yeah, so thank you for listening, and you're welcome by questions.
So I'm wondering, what's the approximate data transfer speed for this diode?
Well, the diode...
How many kilobytes per second?
Is that a secret? No, they can fire me, so...
it's slow, that's why it's secure.
Yeah, kind of. I think it's about 100 megabits, if I remember correct.
Thank you.
I was normally working with the crypto devices. and they have almost the same speed. And the next generation of such device is going to be more specialized. So you will have one sort of crypto device for server halls, another one for out in the fields, so to say, because these devices can be used connected to a radio in the if you are out in the fields, so to say. Actually making up TCP networking communication over shortwave radio. That is slow. I promise you. Then we are talking of approximately kilobytes per second, like a old-fashioned modem or anything like that. But then they are talking about gigabits, maybe even 10 gigabits and stuff like that. So the problem is, when it comes to speed, is to get up to speed in the different FPGA systems.
So I googled because I've never heard about data diodes before, and it seems like it also it acts like the recipient host on one side, and then it's completely decoupled for the other side and just passing the data on.
Yeah.
And then acts as the sending host on the other side, basically.
Yeah.
So it's a proxy with a complete disconnect in between.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a weird thing.
Yeah.
So I had never heard of it before, and you read about it, and you're like, huh.
So this is actually kind of one of the few devices that has reached one of the highest score in this assurance level system. There's one company that has gained one of the highest scores, highest rankings.
It seems to be like a weird Von accelerator.
Yeah, kind of.
No, it's also sort of SDKs for further protocol development as well, which was interesting.
Yeah, because that sort of devices, you have to decide what kind of communication should be possible. Because if you should convince a computer system that you are in touch to whatever equipment you have protected behind the data diode, then you need to write a sort of specialized protocol setup.
Yeah,
or
protocol emulator kind of thing.
Sorry?
So emulator kind of thing. So if
Yeah.
you get a live check back, you have to respond correctly.
Yeah.
So that it can just seem like a flow of data and you're still alive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, that's cool.
Any more questions?
Yeah. In these assurance models, is formal verification something of importance in them? And if you can say anything about it, is it something that you're working on or they look for? I mean, formally verifying kernel or programs?
No. That's way too complex. Some years ago, we had this guy, is it called Jonas or anything like that? I don't remember. He was talking about a small operating system that is formally verified. There are commercial variants of such operating systems. I think Green Hills Software have such one. I was once on a symposium where they described their operating system in compared to Linux kernel. And after a while I realized they are comparing two completely different things. Because their operating system with high score in the EAL consists of 7,000 lines of code. And it turned out that, yeah, you can get network communication if you wish, but that's outside the operating system. So that part is not guaranteed. So I don't think formally verified or formal verification is a foreseeable future for such a huge thing as Linux kernel. I don't know if we even want that because it's so complex. That will kill all the spirit that goes on.
And then there's a new stable release in the start over again.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Anything else? Okay.
Thank you, Joakim.
Thank you.